We're going to get to our keynote speaker in a second, but I just wanted to give Hope Eccles, who is our Lane Center Advisory Council Chair and dear, dear friend of the center, a chance to say just a couple words.
Comes from being short. I just want to say thank you so much for being here. We're delighted. This is a very exciting turnout. We always enjoy each year this opportunity to focus on the rural West, which sometimes gets overlooked and shouldn't. So we've been delighted to be involved with it for a number of years, and we're just thrilled to be up here in Montana at this beautiful campus. And want to thank Daniel and Zephyr for all their leadership on it. So again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to the panelists. It's been a terrific morning, and I think we're in for another treat. So we'll look forward to that. Thank you.
Okay, it is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Justin Farrell. Justin is a professor of sociology at Yale University, whose research examines how landscapes and culture shape American institutions, past and present. His book, Billionaire Wilderness, The Ultra-Wealthy and the Remaking of the American West, offers an in-depth look at the ultra-wealthy in Teton County, Wyoming. It's an eye-opening portrait of the changing American West. He grew up in Wyoming, so he is a son of the West and divides his time between Yale and the Mountain West. He also directs a research program on rural communities. So please join me in welcoming Justin Farrell.
All right, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is a great turnout, and I think these are my favorite types of conferences, getting lots of different folks together from different sectors. Talking after lunch is a dangerous proposition, but I'll do my best. So my research focuses on the modern West, especially how it's grown and changed since 1990. I'm a sociologist, but I sometimes like to say that I'm a historian of the present, if that makes sense. I care deeply about Western lands and communities. And some of what I'll say today comes from my new book that I'm finishing up, and based on research in places like Bozeman again, but other places around the rural West. And some of what I'm going to say today also comes from my experiences teaching at Yale, and I teach in the School of the Environment. So I work with all kinds of different students from interdisciplinary backgrounds, natural scientists, humanities folks, social scientists like myself, and I direct a center on Western lands and communities. And I'll say a bit more about that later, but mostly I think my center at Yale is like some sort of, I don't know, excuse that I created 12 years ago so I didn't have to feel like I was living in exile back east, and it's a way for me to kind of get back out west. And I come from, both sides of my family are from the West. My mom's side were Mormon or LDS settlers in what is now Park City, which is the last time I was at this conference, was in Park City. And my dad's side are Irish Catholics in Cheyenne, and that's where I was born. And so a lot of this really is kind of personal for me as well. It's just an honor to be here too, just with two universities that I have always admired from afar, frankly, both of which care deeply about the future of the West and its landscapes and people. Okay, just as a brief kind of trail map for this, I have just two main points to make. I don't think I have. Do I have slides? No slides? Good slides? Okay. Oh, here. All right. Well, there's my name and title. But I have two points to make, and I don't have many slides. The first is I want to share how this might sound strange, but how I kind of see the world throughout my research, and as a practitioner too. And I'm a professor, so naturally or maybe unnaturally, it will end up a little bit in the clouds to begin with, but just bear with me. I'm drawing on a large body of social science research and data, most of which I kind of keep in the background. Second, I want to offer some concrete examples of how this way of seeing the world that I'll try to articulate to you can help communities navigate the complexities of the world in which we're living now. I'm not a politician. I don't do policy. I care about policy. But my hope is that this is useful for those that do. And I'm going to present basically a series of what I see as of national and regional challenges and ways that this way of seeing the world and understanding the world through this cultural lens that I'll describe can help us maybe confront some of these challenges better. Okay. So this first point, I want to share just kind of, again, how I see the world, or better yet, maybe a way to describe that as a theory of change. It's not a unique view. It's already been discussed a little bit today, but I do think it gets buried, and that's kind of an important point I want to make, to our detriment. This conference is about political, economic, environmental futures of the rural West, and those things, obviously matter a great deal. Policy, markets, ecology. But my claim is simple: is that moral culture and the culture that sort of bonds us together, and this has been mentioned before. Terry set me up perfectly for this. That a great deal flows from that, maybe more than we might realize or want to understand. What is culture? That's kind of the million-dollar question. It's just as unclear as like, what is the West? But by culture, I mean a moral world of a place. So we could think about values, norms, narratives, the communities or the social groups within communities' aspirations, their ways of life, their sense of who belongs and who doesn't. What counts as a good life? What do people owe one another? What kind of future do people sense is worth building? So real change or real stability, real conflict, usually does not begin with a new program or policy, in my view. It begins with the stories that individuals and groups tell about kind of who they are, what they value, what they reject, what a good life looks like, and those sorts of things. So I'm separating out culture, I think, a little for the sake of clarity, a little too neatly. That does not mean that I think economics or the market or anything else material, environmental science, whatever it is, are somehow unimportant or not central or not sort of influencing culture and shaped by culture themselves. It's this process, right? But material forces are never just material, and that's the best way to put it. They're always carried through a community's values, its norms, its institution, its memory of itself, how it communicates itself to newcomers. But this kind of community-level culture, I think one of the main things I want to say is that just in my work, I just see it ignored all the time by decision makers, or at least treated as secondary, or as mere stories that we tell, or something as too soft or vague to really actually matter. So I'm going to kind of push you on that. But that's sort of my first point, and as a preamble, really. I want to make this more concrete with a few examples from my research and teaching at Yale, which I realize is an outlier in lots of ways. Some of this may not map perfectly onto your own work, but I hope they kind of get your gears turning. And I think we've as a society kind of forgotten how much this matters, and I'll explain why. All right. My first example, so I'm going to present just a series of examples and different ways of seeing things, I hope. So my first example comes from the world that some of you may know from living here, or may have read about it in the book that was mentioned, Billionaire Wilderness. On its face, that book dealt with a straightforward economic problem. The rapid influx of wealth into amenity towns in the West. So housing gets tighter, to put it lightly, wages don't keep up, daily life gets harder, COVID throws gasoline on this fire that's already burning, and wealth concentrates even more, and communities are kind of struggling to keep up. That's what that book is about. But what interested me most was not wealth in the abstract, not even really housing in the abstract. It was what happens to a community itself when it's under that kind of pressure. So I'm really focused on the community. What becomes of a town when money arrives that fast? How do newcomers learn? These newcomers that kind of move in, how do they learn? How do they, about local life? How do they romanticize and consume older ways of life? How do longtime residents receive them or not? What happens to teachers, service workers, police and fire when these folks can no longer live in the community? So it was really focused on that, and wealth was just an entry into those issues in a really stark way. And so, really, I asked myself a lot, like, how much of that comes down to the market or economics alone versus something deeper about whether a community still has a civic strength or understands itself enough to absorb rapid change. So that, to me, was always kind of the deeper story in that book. And my argument was never that, material conditions don't matter or something like that. Of course they do. But it was that these local problems become more politically and socially unmanageable when the underlying culture is weak. I think that's probably, I'm not a psychologist, my wife is a therapist, I'm learning, a new therapist, so I'm learning a lot about this kind of stuff. It's probably true for individuals as well, but I do groups. But when that culture is stronger, when a group culture is strong, communities can absorb pressure. They can kind of channel differences, which are, a healthy part of a community. People can argue better, and maybe even adapt with better policies. Of course, though, that doesn't mean every community with a strong culture or a sense of itself and ability to kind of project that culture out into expectations, that they're able to hold the line or even resist change if they wanted to. Obviously, some changes are so overwhelming, so strongly imposed that no amount of civic strength can fully absorb them. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm blaming communities for forces beyond their control. But when that shared moral culture is weaker, these pressures again become, I think, more destabilizing than they would otherwise be. So I was recently in Steamboat, which faces many of the pressures here, other places around amenity towns in the West. And what struck me was, more than other places I've been, I'm not necessarily commenting on Bozeman. It's been 2 or 3 years since I've been here, which, holy moly. But drove in from the airport. What struck me was that Steamboat has a somewhat articulate sense of itself, that it's rooted in its history, it's rooted in its working lands, it's rooted in its recreation. But it has this clearer sense of who it is, and that doesn't make their choices much easier. I think it can make them easier when they face hard choices. And they're able to kind of communicate that in public settings through different ad campaigns and things like that. And that's not just one answer to all of this, but they just had this sense of who they were. I know that sounds very vague and maybe even woo-woo, but it's been more effective, I think. All right, second example. This one from public lands. So I'm moving on from billionaire wilderness. I'm happy to talk about that after. And this all kind of is part of the same message, I think. But in public lands, where I think, again, in public land management, we often see as a management or a funding problem, not as much as a moral or cultural one. So we're asking, it's no surprise, we're asking more of public lands, but not always caring for them at the same pace. Trails wear down. Maintenance lags. I probably don't have to tell you this. 2 years ago, though, I wrote it before Memorial Day, but I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times on the link between declining civic engagement in America and what it means for something as basic as trail maintenance in the West. Isaac's talk, I don't know where Isaac is, but set me up perfectly for this, mentioning this trail group and this land trust. I tried to use this topic to get into something bigger in American culture, to kind of give you some concrete examples. Relative to trail maintenance, I see kind of across the data are very clear, and maybe you feel this too, if you have some years behind you, is that shared life has really weakened in America, especially since 1990. One way some people talk about this now is this loneliness epidemic. But loneliness, again, isn't just an individual mental health issue. It's the emotional reality of when social and communal resources deteriorate, when institutions deteriorate. And it's what it feels like when cultural institutions thin out. I think that's why this is such an exciting conference for me, to see so many different kinds of institutions gathered at a pillar of the institution here. And when that happens, though, when cultural institutions decline, as they have, we could think about lots of different ways that's happened. It's social trust declines. Fewer people feel part of something bigger than themselves. People report having fewer friends. They sort of spend more time alone, and so forth. And when people stop feeling connected, they stop showing up, and they lose trust and they tune out. Sometimes they lash out or are attracted to different types of ideologies on the margins, or when those ideologies become centralized within our culture. But some of the pushback, though, I think, to this op-ed was really telling to me, why I included it here as an example, was people were like, no, this is just really a funding issue, which I agree it is a funding issue. Not that it's not some deeper cultural problem, which I, again, push back. I think it's both. Of course, funding matters, but to me, that reaction kind of proved the point here, that we're often very kind of uncomfortable talking about these kinds of issues, about our community's values and those sorts of things, and more comfortable talking about management and money and dollars and cents. So I think this matters for all kinds of corners of public life, but especially here in the West for environmental and sustainability management too. I don't think that people today are necessarily more selfish or lazy or something, or they don't want to work a trail, but they sort of lack the modern, or have been raised in settings where they sort of lack the moral sources and the institutions that may teach civic virtue, and these sorts of muscles have withered. I don't think they've dried up, but there's a lot of data on how they've withered over the last 3 to 4 decades. Okay. Well, I got a couple more here. Let me see. A third example has to do with recreation, ecotourism, and the culture that I think is growing up around them. And I might risk sounding like an old crank on a soapbox with this one. I'm sorry. But this is one of in my new book, I have 4 different sections. This is one of them. On the surface, the growth of this industry and this culture is a simple kind of growth story, that more people move in, more people show up on the trails, buy more gear, they're put more pressure on the land, there's sometimes more conflict, but more people are recreating, which is a good thing. I think, though, something deeper is going on within portions of this culture. I don't want to paint with a broad brush, and this may sound sort of out of nowhere, but I think it's tied to the rise of what scholars have called expressive individualism, that the rise of the modern self and the celebration of the modern self over the group and the common good. I'm not trying to create a binary here, but the idea is simple, that the self becomes kind of the center of meaning. It's sort of my identity, my personal fulfillment, my journey. It's different than like this rugged individualism in the literature, but it's related. It's a new iteration. And again, I'm not trying to condemn and focus on the self, or I'm not trying to like dunk on your inward journey, but I'm I'm just describing a kind of a real shift in American life. If you're interested in reading more about this, one of the best books is from a Berkeley sociologist named Robert Bellah called Habits of the Heart. Has anybody heard of this? Habits of the Heart? Couple? Ben, that's because you were in my class and you had to read it. Or Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone. He's written about this. Anybody? Yeah. A lot of sociologists and political scientists are thinking about these things, as are other social scientists and historians. But in my new book, I try to trace one Western version of this that I call the Stoked. I think I'm going to call it. It's this culture, or really this industry, that treats the West, and stop me if you've heard this before, as a place for freedom, of self-healing, of recreation, of adventure, reinvention. What it offers, I think, can be genuinely compelling, to myself included, in some ways, but it does not build thick community in the places where it lands. And I probably don't have to tell you this, but so more often it creates a looser community of mobile people who kind of share the same hobbies. They're lightly rooted or rooted elsewhere, often unaware of like local workers who prop up their experiences and who come to the West or emerge from the West to find something for themselves rather than do that and join a place and take responsibility for it. So that's a third example. A fourth, kind of related, because it sounds even more like a crank. Screens, social media, the attention economy. Like that's, I don't need to introduce this much, I'm guessing. You've probably seen the graphs. These things are all kind of tied together. Maybe you've felt some of this in your own life, but attention gets fragmented. Everything's speeding up. People take in the world in shorter bursts and with less patience for complexity, for contradiction, for even like moral seriousness about that underpins some of these questions that I'm raising. I think we all know some of that, right? But I wanted to share what I think are maybe some hopeful directions, at least in the work that I do as a professor, which is a very narrow thing. But one response for me is that it's got to happen in the classroom. And I'm going to go to my next slide, which is very different than my other one. So in my courses, I've been teaching for 12 years, and I teach mostly in the fall because I split so much time doing the research center out west. But in my courses, I really have, I guess in the last 8 years or so, shifted my curriculum so that it slows things down. Students really, from the beginning, even if we're talking about conservation, if we're talking about what are easements, or if we're talking about different markets in agriculture or whatever it is, that we slow down and wrestle with real human questions first. We read a lot of social science and philosophy on human values, where they come from. This relates, but I don't allow computers or phones in my class, and I still give old-fashioned blue book, like essays, which are becoming impossible to read, I think. That's like AI proofing, I guess, now, which is nice. But students encounter different value systems, and when we read about the West, we begin with the histories, right? And thank you. But we also talk, again, about ethics, and I don't teach specific ethics. I think by raising them, I think it's valuable that we do, and that's maybe an ethical framework. But again, what does it mean to belong to a place? What does it mean to inherit one? What does it mean to join one responsibly? These sorts of questions are really important. And universities spend a lot of time teaching practical skills, but I think much less time teaching students why those skills matter in the first place and what they even mean within a cultural framework, because everyone lives within a cultural framework, so they do matter. So what do those skills mean? I have also, second response is that I've developed the last, I guess, since I've been at Yale, is a field course through my Western Center where in the spring, my course is in the field, and we build relationships and interact with folks on the ground that they would not otherwise encounter on campus. That's my one rule. So we're in Rexburg with LDS communities. We are on the Wind River with both tribes, in Pinedale with Jonah Energy Company, with the Latino community groups in Jackson, outfitters in Bondurant. That's like my curriculum in the spring. I came here straight from my field course actually yesterday. But we just kind of get out and we are in these places, and it teaches them just in the situation, humility, reciprocal learning, sustained kind of attention, and to see communities not as something that's abstract. How much time I got here? Okay, I got 5 minutes. Okay, 2 minutes. Okay. Let's see here. I only have one more point to make. This is on political polarization, and I have pretty strong ideas about this in the sense of the importance of culture for inoculating people against the seemingly like unstoppable force of money in politics, of fear in politics, and by building those foundations, we can better weather those storms, or people will sort of know what they see when they see it, and it won't be as attractive. That sounds so naive, I know. But I think it's one of the only ways that we can sort of push forward as communities to maintain community character, to welcome new people in, and have a vision of what that looks like. I'm just going to finish up here. The other thing is I think that we need a more honest, especially in academia. I don't know, I can't speak for MSU or Stanford, but of understanding different political traditions in the West. There are fair critiques of academia, like many of which I share, and I've worked inside this world long enough that I sort of understand its blind spots and agree with those. But we need to take, at least within academia and in places like Yale, integrate frameworks that are broader than what we currently have, that take seriously native traditions, conservative traditions, and to treat those not as stereotypes or as these sort of like common sense things, or even as a pathology, but as traditions with history, with their own moral logics and their own connections to the land, and bring those into the discussion. And my center really tries to do this through the field courses and working with communities on pro bono client projects. And that's what most of my students are doing. And I'm here with Michelle from our initiative, where we do a lot of that kind of work. And so if you want to chat afterwards, catch us. So I think finally another answer, at least for me at Yale, is to increase the pipeline. So a lot of the students I work most closely with are from the West or the rural West. Most of my doctoral, if not all of my doctoral students, do work on the rural West. And so I've kind of built this outpost. Again, I think it's just me probably dealing with something being out there, but it's been really cool, and it's been really supported, and it's really neat to kind of see where the students go and what they're doing in these communities. So I just kind of want to wrap up here that I just hope these examples have suggested that beneath the policy debates or beneath a lot of the economic pressures or that we talk about so much, that even beneath all the legal wrangling or all the data, that there is this deeper layer of shared culture, and we need to, whether we like it or not, is really the fundamental engine of any community. So I think our era has to be one of like rebuilding institutions that can cultivate these virtues. And only these kinds of shared stories, I think, about who we are, where we're going, who belongs, that I think we can, again, inoculate people when they encounter, seemingly unstoppable forces of especially fear and money and politics. I think if we can do that, maybe local communities can better face change when it inevitably comes. All right, thank you. Okay. All right. One question. Make it good. Yeah. Do you want to? Oh, this one's got a cord on it. I can repeat it. I promise I'll do my best.
And other, newcomers to the region or to certain communities who are committed kind of bridge these cultural divides and fit into the equations of the things you were talking about.
Okay, so how do newcomers fit in? Or how?
But yeah, a different kind of newcomers. So, folks who are, not just wealthy, but, children of immigrants, service workers, et cetera, everyone else of it.
I think tapping into the history of many of these communities in the West, which have always been transient, diverse, in like a real way. And I think that message gets lost, for sure. So I actually don't, I think there's a lot of compatibility there. I don't think communities do a good job of communicating those. And I think after, like with Building Our Wilderness, I wrote that book, and then COVID happened, and I think it brought a lot of this to the foreground and forced people to reckon with it. But I don't think there's any sort of anything out of step with that at all. Yeah, actually think it's an area of strength. Yeah. All right. I'll be around too, and I'll be less stressed looking at my talk. So happy to chat. Thanks.